we go.
Hey guys, this week we got Frank Tousignant on the podcast. How's it going, man?
Good. How about you?
Good. It's me, Frank, and as usual, we got Nick.
Hey guys.
So yeah, we're gonna Frank, appreciate you jumping on, man.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, for sure. I know I reached out, I don't know, probably a month or two ago. And I was like, hey, you want to be on? And you're like, yeah, let's do it. And then you were probably starting to wonder, like, is this guy ever going to get a hold of me? And was he lying to me?
I was the other way around. I was telling you just before I jumped on, I was watching back some of your guys' previous episodes, and I was looking at some of the names on the previous episodes. I was like, man, I don't know how I fit in this group. There's some big names on this. I'm like, who wants to listen to me talk for 45 minutes?
Yeah. No, I mean, well, we do for starters, but we just like to, we've been, fortunate, like I was saying before we got on here, we've been very fortunate and blessed to have some pretty popular people in the industry join us. But I mean, we also like to talk to the small, the lesser known people and just kind of hear their story. Not saying that you're a lesser known person, because a lot of people know who Carbon Pursuit is.
Mm-hmm.
They know the business, but they may not know the driving force behind the business. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, and that's really like, that's what we want to talk to.
Yeah.
That's who we want to talk to. That's what we want to talk about. So,
yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure, man. So, first question: if you've listened to the previous episodes, you probably knew this was coming. First snowmobile.
So I had a 90, it would have been like a late 90s kitty cat, probably like 95, 96, somewhere around there. I was your traditional Midwest Minnesota kid. So yeah, kitty cat right off the start would have been the first one.
Okay. And then progressed to...
Yeah, it would have been the full progression. Z120 would have been next, and then I would have been into a 99 ZL440, so that would have been my first full-size sled. And then I moved up to like a 06 F5 when I was probably like a teenager. And then, yeah, I mean, it's just progressed from there, Arctic Cat my whole life. So growing up here in Minnesota, my uncles and my cousins both raced cross country. So they're Arctic Cat guys. So grew up in, around them racing, kind of that whole 90s area, early 2000s. And then my cousins raced well into like the 2010s, 2000, probably around 15, probably stopped racing. So yeah, just kind of grew up around Arctic Cat. So that's kind of always been my brand of choice. I love all sleds, honestly, growing up, like I said, I'm a big sled head myself. So, there's definitely no ill will towards any of the brands. I love all the brands for what they bring to the table. So yeah, that's kind of my sled story.
Yeah. Did you panic a little bit when Arctic Cat was in dire straits there?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, with Textron owning the business there for that stint, I think a lot of us, diehard Arctic Cat guys were ready for whatever was going to be the next chapter, and obviously we didn't want that next chapter to be the end of it. And so, yeah, very happy to see, Brad step back in and, be a part of that company. I just, personally right now, I think they have a great thing going with the Catalyst chassis. I've spent a lot of time on that in the last couple of years here, and I love that chassis. So that's a great thing. I think, obviously if you look at the sled industry as a whole, we need more brands. We need all the brands. So we got to keep it rolling. We got to, keep all them brands around. We don't want to go down to just, two of the big boys. So
yeah. I totally agree, because yeah, when it was looking like they might go belly up, I was like, man, and not that it's a horrible thing, but it's not good. But I'm like, man, we're just going to have Polaris and Skidoo, and they're going to kind of just run everything. And we lost Yamaha, and I'm like, this can't be the way it ends. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that cat community is really strong. I mean, I'm sure you guys know, the cat diehards are definitely cat diehards. And so, I think even if cat went away, they'd just keep bringing back the old stuff forever.
Yeah,
so
they'd ride those things till they're gone.
Yeah. They're, I equate like Arctic Cat people, and this isn't a dig on Arctic Cat people, but they're like Harley people,
Yeah, it is.
And I applaud it. They are brand loyal.
Yes, that is for sure. Yep.
So nothing wrong with that, but I was like, that's going to be a hard one for them to let it go, because it just is what it is.
Yep.
So, All right, let's get into our question. So, for anyone that's new to Carbon Pursuit, and a lot of people, like I said, they know who you are and they know Carbon Pursuit. Um, what's the story behind you? How you got started?
Yeah. So just real quick. So Carbon Pursuit, we're coming up on about like 5 years as a company here. So fully, producing sled parts and selling. We've been building a little bit longer than that. I've been doing carbon fiber work for, oh gosh, got to be over 10 years now, somewhere in there. So I went to school. I'm a composite engineer by trade. So, all things, carbon, fiberglass, thermosets, thermoplastics, different things like that. So that's kind of my degree by trade. And so out of school, I went and built floats for float planes at a company here in Minnesota. So big carbon fiber structures. So I did that for a couple years. That's kind of where I really got, a deep dive into kind of the way that I build carbon fiber parts. So there's lots of different ways to build carbon. There's hobby maker style all the way up to, aerospace grade composites. So being that I was building floats for float planes, that general aviation kind of falls in that, not full aerospace level, but pretty close. So kind of that, real high end materials, building things, cooking them in an oven, all that. So kind of took that experience, and then I went away from the floats, and I went and did 3D printing for work for Stratasys, big 3D printing company here in Minnesota. After that, and I worked there for like 8 years, I think, something like that. And during that time, I missed building carbon fiber parts. That's what I went to school for, and obviously 3D printing was a big part of what I had learned and everything like that in school too. But missed the carbon fiber part of it. And then still riding during that whole time, and I had an Alpha, so an Arctic Cat Alpha 2019, that first year, the Alpha, and just kind of saw an opportunity there with that Alpha rail. So I ended up bending one of my Alpha rails early on, and I was kind of like, there was other aluminum braces and things like that on the market, and I was kind of like, man, I could build something like this, hobby maker style in my shop. And so CAD modeled something up, had it cut out, built it, had it cut out by a water jetter here local to me, and started running that. And then kind of had other Alpha guys in my group that we were going out west with, and they're like, hey, I'd run one of those, I'd buy one off of those. And it's kind of spiraled from there. We went and did like started out, we did the swap at Heydays, so we went out in the swap and started selling in the swap, and then it's kind of, like I said, it's continued to grow from there.
So was it at that point when you developed the brace for the Alpha Rail that you were like, hey, I'm going to start doing this as a business? Or
Yeah, I mean, I don't, it's one of those things. I always wanted to take it as a business, from the start, with talking with my wife, Leah, we were kind of like, hey, if I'm going to do this, I should do it. Let's get an LLC. Let's start trying to sell, let's see what we can do. And we started small, at the time it felt big, because it's, hey, we're diving in, and, we're going to, start our own business and start selling a couple products. We had targeted just the Arctic Cat chassis to start with, because that's what I had in the garage, so it's kind of like, I can build that Alpha rail brace, I can build a skid plate, I can build some belt guards, some stuff like that, real just couple products right off the bat, and our, like I said, the cat fan base is pretty strong, and I was riding with a lot of cat guys. And so, it kind of just went from there. And then pretty quickly, it's like, well, if we're going to do this, seriously, I got to start looking at other OEMs. And so then, kind of going from year one into year two, we added in some Polaris products, and then year two into year three, we added in some Skidoo products. And then the last year here, we've just kind of really opened up the doors to, trail models, mountain models, bringing in links, different things, stuff like that. So, just trying to expand our catalog as much as we can, to provide the best, offerings that we can to a variety of different riders.
yeah, no, that's pretty good. And I mean, I've looked at your guys' site, and I mean, you got quite a bit of stuff out there so far, and you have some carbon fiber parts too that I was like, I did not know that existed. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've prided myself in trying to produce, parts that not gimmicky parts, parts that provide serious protection, or weight savings, whatever it is. Like I tell everybody, not all of our parts save weight. So a lot of people, they hear carbon fiber and they think like, oh, that's just you're out there to save weight, and it's like, well, our skid plates don't save weight. You could run stock with nothing on the bottom, and that'd be lighter. But a lot of us hit stuff, and so our skid plates do add weight, but it adds a small amount of weight compared to if you're going to run a bulkier skid plate. And plus, a lot of our components we introduce Kevlar into. And so that's kind of where we specialize in, like, a lot of like drivetrain guards and skid plates and different things like that, that not only is it carbon, but we've brought in this Kevlar now. And so we're building hybrid composites that I think is different than it's been done in the past. There's, a lot of companies that produce great carbon fiber parts for, the sled industry or power sports as a whole. But to my knowledge, there's not a lot of like carbon Kevlar hybrid parts. So I'd say that's maybe a little bit of our niche right now is, some of those, high impact areas that, providing something that truly can take a hit.
Yeah. So the trade-off is, and a good selling point, I guess, would be like, yeah, it's going to be a little bit heavier, but the strength is there. So that's the trade-off. And that's a good trade-off other than,
Yeah.
and plus, plus looking cool. That's another,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's another good trade-off.
Yeah, you're right, Derek. We got the kind of this combo, right? We pride ourselves in aesthetic looking carbon. So after we finish all our parts, everything gets clear coated with UV resistant clear coat, and we spend a pile of time sanding and polishing and buffing and making them look pretty. Because I want everybody that runs our parts to be super satisfied with the look. Obviously we could get them out the door quicker with a, not a bad surface finish, but just like not that glossy, shiny carbon that we all love. And so, we put time into that so that they look nice. And then, like I said, we just try to offer a variety of different applications. If you need something that's strong, we offer that. If you need to save weight, we offer parts for that too. So just trying to make sure that, we're multidimensional when it comes to what parts we build and what we offer.
Yeah. And the looking pretty is a bonus too.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Mhm.
all around, it's a win.
Yeah.
Just call it that, right?
Yep. Of course.
So how much of the brand would you say is built around, if any, how much is it built around like your personal riding style and maybe even your lifestyle? Like,
Yeah, I'd say lifestyle is a big part of it. Obviously, so I'm a family guy. I got a wife. I got 2 young boys. So we are a family company. It's just me and my wife building parts. And just, I think for me personally, the sled community is very important to me. I'm a big, just I love sledders. I love what the community offers. I think that if you listen to a lot of podcasts, I think that's what a lot of people will tout, is just that it is a unique group of people that, I think the more that we do things like this and do more community stuff that, it pulls us all together and, we build this really strong, group. And so that's what I wanted the brand to resemble is this small family business that, hey, a guy can call me and we can talk parts, we can talk sleds, we can talk application, hey, what went wrong with this, where it's doing well. I didn't want to lose that in the early stages. I didn't want it to become where, hey, when you call Carbon Pursuit, you're talking to, some sort of automated line or, whether it's just, the person at the front desk that, doesn't really know the parts. So, we're still trying to strive for that. Obviously, as the business grows, there's reasons to go away from that because you can't get pulled in all those directions and all those phone calls. But I'm trying my best to maintain that, customer first mentality. And so that's kind of, that's all built into that. And then from a riding style standpoint, yeah, I think that, I love the mountains. So I spend as much time out west as I can. But living here in Minnesota, I grew up trail riding. I still trail ride a lot in Minnesota up north. And so that's a whole nother aspect that I don't want to lose in the brand as well. I don't want to be a one-dimensional, mountain based company. I want to provide to trail riders. I want to provide to, kids that are growing up and they're on, they're just trying to get their feet wet in the sport and all that. And their dad's buying them parts, so I try my best to keep my parts reasonable so that we can, be a part of younger kids' sleds and things like that. I don't want to price myself out of the market where, hey, unless you're building the top-notch build, then you can only afford Carbon Pursuit parts. So yeah, there's a lot that's gone into just trying to build Carbon Pursuit into something that when we're talked about, whether it's, on the mountain or on the trail, that there's a level of like, dang, those are nice guys. Those guys over at Carbon Pursuit, you can call him anytime, nights, weekends, and most likely he's going to get back to you as soon as he can. So, I'm trying to my best to maintain that.
yeah, you're trying to keep that authenticity and,
Yeah.
and that's awesome, man, because I mean, there's companies out there that still do it, but yeah, as to your point, as they grow,
Yeah.
they
It gets
start to
tough,
lose
yeah.
that. It
Yeah.
does get tough. Those
Yeah.
those owners are balancing a lot of things. There's a lot of irons in the fire, so I get that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, it's definitely one of those things where this industry is, we got such a short window of, riding time. And so everything gets packed into such a small window. And so definitely, those bigger companies, they got such an uphill battle to make sure that they're maintaining that customer satisfaction, during just the crazy busyness of the winter season.
for
Definitely.
for sure.
Well, Frank, what were your earliest prototypes like, and how did that evolve the products you make today?
Yeah, definitely. So testing wise, so once we started, obviously I'm a Minnesota guy, so I couldn't be on the mountain, every weekend testing or nights and weekends and all that. So from the start, we relied really heavy on Freshies Built. So Kyle Hustis out there in Sealy Lake, great friend right from the start. Met Kyle, just kind of through, riding and him guiding, my group out there in Sealy. And then once I had started the business, he was an early adapter, him and Chase Yock. Chase was obviously a UP guy, and then has moved out west now. But both of them just started running our parts very early. And I can't thank those guys enough. Previous podcasts, previous things like that. I always mention those guys because you can't forget your day ones. And those guys
Yep.
were there backing me from the start. Did a lot of testing with my products. And so, we were able to, from an alpha rail standpoint, make sure that thickness was right. And, we offer a pretty beefy laminate with that. So that worked out great. But we've had other products that, we've had to improve, so we looked at doing some kind of more like skid related parts, like in the Polaris Matrix, there's that rod that goes kind of by the shocks there. So we looked at doing that. We tested some, and just the weight savings we were looking for, we couldn't get something strong enough. And so we kind of ended up pulling that product. We never released that one. So there's different things like that we've tested. Belt guards, when we first started making them, we were super thick. We built those really heavy because I was so nervous about, hey, if a belt blows, I'm just, I don't know how good that Kevlar and carbon
Yep.
is going to hold up. I can do all the ASTM drop testing in the world, but that is a whole nother situation
It's
depending
an
on when that.
explosion. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can drop big weights from way up high and, have a good feeling for what that might be. But as we all know, when those belts blow, that's a whole nother level. And so the great thing is that with time, over the course of the last like 3 years to now, since we've released that product, we've been able to lighten that up. So we've, definitely the first belt guards were overbuilt, and we're, at a pretty nice spot right now where, we've even had like, some P22 clutches get thrown at them last season, and they do well. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it's exciting to, work through those prototypes and, hone in on products. Like I said, the more time we get on the snow and on the mountain with a lot of our products, we've really gotten to a point where we feel really confident in a lot of our layups and a lot of our thicknesses and things like that, which is just going to help us going forward in producing better products.
Nice. Nice. How much abuse testing, real world testing do you guys do before you release a product?
Ideally, I like to try to get at least like a full winter on stuff before it goes out. But it's hard. Like I said, our industry is so unique where things change so fast, right? I mean, we might have a chassis that's only around for 5 years. Within that chassis, a lot of those components can change year from year to year,
Year to year.
So
Yep.
so like, for example, like when we released our Polaris bumper, so we have that slash delete, you drop off your slash portion of your Matrix chassis. We have a nice full tunnel support one piece. It's a great part. When we launched that was designed for like the 2022 chassis. Well, then in 2025, they changed the running boards, which, when it first, it's a running boards change, I'm good to go. That doesn't affect my part. And then that part comes out and it's like, oh, wow, I have to totally change, how
Right.
that part of mine mounts. I got to come up with a new mold. And, that's the hard thing for me is like all my products are designed and built out of molds. So if there's a design change, it's a whole new mold. And that's always painful. It's expensive. It's time
Yep.
consuming. So yeah, we have such a short window that some products get less testing. But like I said, we've got a pretty good feel for thicknesses and things like that right now where, like headlight deletes, we feel pretty dang confident in releasing those as soon as we can. Things that take impacts, again, we feel pretty confident there. Structural parts, that's the ones we like to get more time on, like the Polaris Matrix bumper I brought up earlier. That was one that we wanted people to be able to tow sleds out of the backcountry if they needed to. And so making sure
Yep.
that was truly strong enough was a big part of that one.
Cool. Cool. What
Yeah.
what gaps or aesthetic or performance gaps did you see in the market that you were like really trying to fill?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I mean, carbon fiber's been around in the sled world for a long time. I mean, C3 back in like what early 2000s was building carbon fiber components. I think
Sleds,
they're
full
yes, full
chassis. Yeah,
sleds.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think they're a part of the Yeti snow bikes now. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure that's the same group.
Yeah.
And so they're obviously building great structures. They've been doing it for a long, long time. Zero's building great hoods for both Polaris and Skidoo. So there's a lot of great carbon fiber out there, but it's just, like I said, I think there's an opportunity for maybe like a little bit lower cost products, something that maybe is a little bit more budget friendly. Obviously a hood is a huge weight savings and that's an awesome product, but having something that maybe is, hey, half the weight savings, and, a little bit cheaper on the price scale, that might be a little bit appealing to, a different, caliper of build, depending on what people are doing. And then I think for us, a lot of our stuff is just trying to make it as easy as possible for the consumer to install. So I pride myself in like, hey, factory mounting holes. We don't have to drill new holes if we don't have to. So just like, everything that I work through the design process, it's trying to take me as a sledder's mindset first and what I would want to do. And I would want my install as easy and quick as possible.
Good.
I'd want that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd want that product to fulfill the gap it's looking to do, so like headlight delete, I want it to save as much weight as possible, but I want my sled to be able to roll down the hill and that not to be broken. And I don't want to pay a pile of money for it because I know the abuse I put my sleds through and stuff happens, right? And so just trying to, like I said, bring all those aspects into the design process and we launch something, feel really confident about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely ease of install is a
Yeah.
huge thing, if it just bolts right up,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Nothing worse than getting something and have to template out holes and drill a bunch
Yeah.
of holes and do all that,
Yes.
for sure.
Yep. Yep.
Not that you won't do it, but it's a
Yep.
pain sometimes, definitely for
Yep.
sure.
It's it kind of like yeah, when you get a part and you gotta drill holes. I always think of like that Jack Sparrow clip where he's like, "Quit blowing holes in my ship,"
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm like, "Oh, here we go again. I got to drill like 15 holes for this
Yeah.
bumper, or this
Mhm.
whatever." I'm like, "Oh, like this
Yep.
can't be the best, but it is what it is."
Yep. Exactly. I hear you there.
Yeah, definitely. So, how do you guys balance like durability, weight loss, weight reduction, and visual appeal all at the same time?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, Nick. I mean it is a fine balance. I do my best to, all my parts I could make paper thin, right? I mean
Yeah,
they could be weightless, and they could go on the sled and we could maximize that. But like I said, I try to treat it as a consumer myself, and like I said, I would want my stuff to be able to take an impact, and survive. I don't want every customer that hit something or rolls into something or whatever it is that they have to be calling that, hey, my part broke and I need something new, or what's your warranty procedure
yeah,
on all this stuff. So that's a balance. Durability is a tough one because it's like, again, we could produce a super overbuilt part, and it'd be super durable, and be able to take whatever impact you throw at it, but then you don't have that weight savings. And so that
yeah.
is it's a balance. We do our best to put out products that achieve that, and I think we're at a pretty good spot. Our products are really light, but they are strong. They've taken lots of impacts over the years here. Lots of customers put them through a heck of a time, and I think the overall perception is that they're working pretty well up to this point.
So you would probably lean a little bit more towards durability than you would weight savings. I'm guessing.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point, Nick. I agree with that. I think that, at the core of it, I would want a more durable part. I'm not trying to achieve the most weight loss I can. I want customers to be happy. I don't want them to be upset that stuff's breaking, and so if
Yeah,
there's a little bit less of a weight savings, I think that's a good spot for the brand. I don't want to be labeled as fragile. And and I
understandable.
think
Yep,
and I
yep.
think that's the hard part with carbon, right? Is I think carbon as a whole, even though it's been around, it's in a lot of other industries, widespread carbon in the snowmobile industry. I think that is a relatively newer thing. Obviously, it's growing. Lightweight builds are all the craze. People are spending big money on builds. And so that's something that when we started Carbon Pursuit, I didn't want to ever have that mantra grow of carbon's great, it's light, it looks good, but it's not strong, it breaks so easy, you know. So I'm, again, as a company, you know, for future carbon makers, or, you know, as just, you know, the perception within the industry, I want people to feel confident in their carbon parts are going to be strong.
Yeah. No, that's good. Walk us walk us through like your, I guess you kind of already you touched on your testing process a little bit, but like as far as your design and testing process, like when you have an idea for a part, you know, how do you take that from an idea to a finished product? I
Yeah.
mean, it sounds like you do some ASTM testing and maybe some real world, but like
Yeah.
how long of a process, like what's all involved in that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll give all the secrets away, Derek. Don't worry.
Not
No, no,
you don't have to give
no,
everything away.
no. I'm a pretty open book. You know, I think that this industry thrives off of, you know, there's a lot of super talented people in this industry, and so I think giving the people the knowledge of, hey, how much work and time actually goes into this is a good thing, and I think people love that. You know, we're mechanics, we're builders, we're things like that that you know, thrive off of how stuff's built. So for me, a lot of times, like, an idea starts with, you know, hey, whatever it is. And then, you know, a lot of times it's bringing in that model of snowmobile, and then getting a 3D scan so that I have, you know, whatever that piece, let's use a headlight delete, for example, just so we can kind of walk through that. So pulling, you know, the hood and scanning that area where the headlight delete or the headlight is, you know, and so we actually have that in a CAD model, and then going forward and designing, you know, what I want that headlight delete to look like. So there's a whole process around that to make sure it hits all those factory mounting holes. Like I said, you know, aesthetic parts are super challenging because what might look good to me might not look good to other people. So you end up with multiple revisions of a CAD model, that then I distribute to a lot of the guys that are nice and close to me from a, you know, industry leader standpoint, you know, guys that are in the, you know, see a lot of sleds, buy a lot of parts, lots of guides. Guides are an awesome source just because they spend so many days on the snow. They see so many customers. So, hey, look at this headlight delete. What do you guys think? Am I on the right track? Do I need to switch it up aesthetically? Get all that feedback, put it back into the model. And then at that point, take it to a 3D print. So print out a 3D model of it so that we can actually fit check it, make sure all the fitment's good. A lot of times that's multiple revisions to make sure everything fits perfectly. The aesthetics are good. And then at that point, we would turn and go to a mold. So usually 3D print out a prototype mold because that's the quickest way for me to get a mold, get some parts built out of carbon, get those out to riders to actually, you know, fit check. You know, if I don't have the sled myself, do the fit check. If I have this sled myself, fit check. But then from a, you know, riders using it standpoint, then we can start getting some of that real world testing. And then once we have that back and now that's dialed in, then we'll go to an actual production mold. So whether that's aluminum mold or, you know, and so get that CNC'd at a CNC shop, or we make a carbon mold ourselves in-house. Depends on what we want to do, depends on volume of parts. Obviously, a metal mold's going to last a lot longer than my carbon molds, but, you know, I might be a little bit cheaper to build it myself. So there's a bunch of trade-offs that go into that. And then get that production mold, and then we can start hammering out production parts. And there's a lot that goes into getting to a production part status, in terms of like the layup goes. So geometry and carbon molds is a huge part of making the part aesthetic, making the part strong. And so getting parts that turn out really good looking takes a lot of time and a lot of experience to get to build those parts. You can't really just like, it's not like vacuum forming. It's not like you just can lay out this sheet of carbon and suck it down in the mold and it fits perfect. So we got to cut up a lot of little pieces and lay them in the mold specifically in different orientations so we build strength. And it's a whole process. But once we get through that, then we have a dialed in part, and then it's just a matter of making it look pretty. So like I mentioned earlier, it's clear coating and buffing and polishing and sanding and all that stuff. So it's a whole process start to finish. It takes a ton of time. And a lot of people probably checked out halfway through that. But it's how we do it. It's not the quickest to market probably. I mean, there's probably quicker ways to do things. But to me, it's a confidence factor. It's when I get through that, I know I've produced the best part I can. It's going to look the best. It's going to fit the best. And then, you know, hopefully in turn, I'm building a brand that people can get behind and say, wow, this guy, he puts the time and effort into it. He's not shortcutting it. He's not looking to just, you know, make his dollar on this industry and get out kind of thing. I'm trying to build parts that are here to stay.
Yeah. So if you guys look at his website and go, "Wow, that's kind of expensive." Now you know why.
Yeah.
There's a lot
Mhm.
of R&D, and I mean, in a lot of
Yeah.
companies, the R&D is the most expensive part of product development.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's a process, and that was just a headlight delete, guys.
Yeah.
That's just a headlight delete.
Yeah,
So
there's a ton of labor into building every part. I mean, I build every part by hand myself. So every part you receive, that's hand built by yours truly. So it's start to finish. It's an effort, but I love it. I mean, there's nothing better than shipping parts out the door and getting positive feedback and things like that. And we've had a lot of little wins within the industry along the way of different people running our products or seeing our products in different places that for me as a sledder at heart, that's what keeps me coming back for more.
yeah, that's awesome, man. I love that. So speaking of parts, what's the most technically challenging part you've ever made?
Oh, it's so like, what's interesting is so like we have like our Skidoo headlight delete for the Gen 5 chassis, which is a relatively small part. I mean, that's just those little ninja eye openings that we get rid of. But that part has a ton of geometry in it. So when I designed that part, I didn't want just like a bubble closeout. I didn't want something that just looked like fish bowls in there. I wanted something that truly brought in some of the body lines and the aesthetics of the panels on the snowmobile and all that. And so we kind of came up with this final design that has a ton of geometry in it. And so I had a reel that I put out on Instagram earlier this year where it's like there's like 70 some pieces of carbon that go into that tiny little product.
Jeez.
And so, that's every one I cut by hand. I cut every kit, so like we call it a kit, like what all goes into a Skidoo headlight delete. And so I cut out all 70 pieces and then by hand, I tuck them all into the certain spot that they got to go and build up the thickness. And that one takes a ton of time. It's time consuming, but it's a great looking part. That one's tough. The factory lid on the Skidoo Gen 5 has to snap into that. And so I have to create a round feature for that to snap in and be able to swivel on. And so that's another really like, secret sauce in the carbon making process to get a round feature and get that all to work. And so, there's a lot that goes into that, but it's a pretty cool little part, but it's pretty complex.
Yeah, 70 pieces for that? Like, holy
Yeah.
cow.
Yeah, just for that little guy.
Yeah. So how do you, and we may have touched on this a little bit earlier, but how do you keep everything, I mean, how do you keep it authentic how do you keep Carbon Pursuit authentic in an industry that's gotten as crowded as it has? I think that's probably the best way to
Yeah.
put that.
No, that's a great question. I will say I do my best to stay in my lane. I try to create parts that I feel are new, or have a carbon spin on them. Obviously there's been headlight deletes for a long time. But when we came out with our carbon headlight deletes, there's nobody else producing carbon headlight deletes. There's aluminum headlight deletes, plastic headlight deletes. So that's new, right? And it's a weight savings. It's high temperature capable, right? So like plastic can melt. If your under hood temps are hot enough, our carbon's good. We're not going to melt anything. And then bringing that carbon appeal. So I think, that's where we're doing our best to stay in our lane, not trying to just carbonize everything. That's not what I want is that, oh, for every aluminum part you can go buy or plastic part you can go buy, there's a carbon version of it sold at Carbon Pursuit. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to sell gimmicks. I'm not trying to sell stuff you don't need. I'm trying to sell solutions to problems. And I think that's a great way for us to stay authentic in the brand, is to just really make sure that the parts we put out are meaningful. I don't want to waste people's time with stuff that's not meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Create solutions to problems
Yeah.
and look good doing it at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yep.
Yep.
Exactly.
No, I can get behind that, man. That's a good idea.
Definitely,
Yeah.
It's
definitely.
it's pretty rad. How do you think snowmobiling's changed, like the culture around it since from when you got in it till now?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot. In my opinion, the sled industry it's ever evolving. So growing up here in Minnesota, and growing up around racing and all that cross country racing, snowcross racing, I always valued that as those were the leaders of the industry, right? Because there wasn't social media at the time, growing up. then you transition into kind of the full film era. And so that was probably my first glimpse at like what Western riding was, kind of thing. Cause I didn't go out West as a kid. And so now that's a whole nother landscape, right? That I get to learn and, start to, kind of, those are some of the idols and things like that, the Chris Barants, the Brett Turcotts, those guys from the early days, the Slednecks, all that stuff. All those DVDs are stacked up in the shop and stuff like that. And so,
Yeah.
there's that whole era though, right? Where it's like that's still pre-social media. So now you have this good combination of racers that are probably gaining, sponsorship support, things like that within the industry. And then you have, guys that are actually in the films. And then now you've transitioned into, you had a death of films. Films are obviously making a comeback. We all know that. There's a lot more going on with that, and that's awesome. I love to see that. But you have the rise of social media. And so that has brought a whole different aspect of, sponsored riders and who's valuable to companies. It's not just racers anymore. It's not just the guys in the films anymore. Me personally as a business owner, if there's a guy that says, hey, I will do an in-depth install video for you and post it on YouTube, and I have a good YouTube following, well, that guy's valuable to me. That's a great way for my part to get installed and be on YouTube, and a guy can quick search how to install it and go, oh, that's a super easy part to install. I can buy that. I can do that. So there's just this whole variety of different ways to, I think be valuable, if that's the right word for it, or be a part of this industry. I
Yeah.
mean, take myself, right? I'm not a professional rider. I'm not the guy out there, racing snowcross, or the guy out there doing the huge stuff on the films. But I can provide value, and I can be a part of this industry in a different way through my own business, and so I can, build parts and sell parts, and that makes me feel a part of it. And, I kind of created that lane for myself as a way to be a part of it. I mean, you guys with your podcast, again, it's a great way for, to find your niche within the industry and be a part of it and find that community that I think we all wanted, without having to be on the racetrack or on, doing the big stuff in the mountains, whatever it may be, if that makes
Yep.
sense.
Yeah. No, dude, that was a very, what's a good way to put that? That was a really good answer. And I was actually got me thinking. I was like, man, he's right. Like
Yeah.
the whole part about social media and people being valuable to companies. I mean, you're 100% right. It's like, you know, like instead of, you think like, sports teams, they go to
Yep.
games and stuff and they scout athletes. Well, that's what companies are just doing on
Yep.
social media now because it's readily available to everybody. And,
Yeah.
some guys out there that are, big time riders have never, to your point, have never been on a racetrack, or
Yep.
they just, hey, I did some reentries in the backcountry and
Yeah.
some pretty sick jumps. And I'm not discrediting those guys. I mean, they
Yeah.
obviously can ride. But that gets a lot of people's attention, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe we should look at this person a little more seriously, and they kind of scout them out that way. So no, that was a
Yeah.
great answer, man. I love that.
Yeah, and for me, it's there's just so much value in the guys that present themselves well on social media. Guys that are clean, polished. They like that's a huge part of it. Knowing that as a business owner, if I can work with a guy and I don't have to be worried about him being a wild card, where it's like, oh man, that video he put out last week, that's that's a tough one. My parts are in there, or whatever it is, right? If you can find a guy that's reliable and he shows off your stuff, to his group of riders, and he's putting it out there in a unique way, like I said, whether that's install videos or maybe it's part specific posts, like, and not just like, hey, here's my bow tie picture, my bow tie video, like, hey, I'm on the mountain today, here is why this bow tie is easier, because I'm running a Carbon Pursuit / Delete bumper, and now that is an easier maneuver. That kind of stuff, like that goes a long way, especially for a small business like me. It's just, it's a great way to get our brand out there, working with a variety of different people. Obviously the biggest guys in the industry, like you said, they have the biggest following. That's you're going to get your parts out there to the masses the quickest. But having people that can show the value in your parts as well, that can be a super great thing.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
What surprised you the most about Carbon Pursuit's growth since the beginning?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, we've been around, like I said, we're coming up on 5 years. I'd say that, obviously up to this point, it's been a grind. It's taken more time and effort than I ever would have thought. I think that for a lot of business owners, and I don't think it's snowmobile specific, I think, anybody that's running their own thing, if you could tell that person 5 years deep, like, hey, this is the amount of hours you're going to have to stick into this thing to get to where you're at. Most people would be like, no, this is nuts. Like, I'm never
Nope,
there.
I'm
What do you
out.
mean? Yeah, for
Yep.
5 years, I'm not going to do anything but work, and that's the foreseeable future as well, and so, but it is one of those things for me, like I said, I think that if I wasn't a snowmobiler, I think it would be really hard to invest that time and effort, but I love it, and I love the people and all that stuff, so it makes that time, sink a little bit easier, and then just from an overall growth standpoint, it's kind of like, this was our first year that so we took it full-time in November, so, up to that point, I juggled it as a side hustle. And it's just, that's a hard one too. I got little kids and I'm juggling this nights and weekends and, everything like that, and
Life,
still
family, yeah.
yeah, still supporting a day
Yeah.
job. And it's a crazy hustle. And I'm crazy appreciative, for, where we're at and all the people that have bought products and run our stuff. And, we're working with, just an unbelievable community of riders. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that 5 years deep, am I surprised at where we're at? I mean, I think I feel blessed. That's what I would say. I think that the time and the effort have been in there, and so it's just a feeling of the way things worked out. I feel very blessed in the situation.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I can get behind that.
Yep.
Yeah,
You put in the time, dude.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, I think there's obviously the highlight reel, that, you can look at, and that's awesome, but there's a lot of time in between the highlights, right? And that's where it comes down to just
Yeah.
the effort and the work. And, like when we talked about everything that goes into designing the parts, and all that, that's a grind. That's not pretty work, and building the parts, people don't care, they just want the finished product, and they want it to look good and they want it at their door. And so, those are the things that, that's the majority of the business, is getting to that point. And so being just, willing to do that, willing to put that day in and day out in.
Yeah, good for you, man. That's
Yep.
awesome.
Yep.
I mean, this is the first time we've met, but I feel proud of you already.
Thanks, Derek. I appreciate that.
I'm like, dang, this dude's just living the dream. I mean, like, you put in the work, dude. You're just doing it. I'm
Yeah.
happy for you, man. I really am.
Yeah, thank you. Like it's always been one of those things that, I go back to the brand. I want the brand to be something that people, can get behind. And I think that the person behind the brand being myself and my wife and, hopefully my kids someday and all that, I want people to look at that as like, dang, that's a great family within this community. They do a lot for the sled world. Like I said, I just want us to be the good guys, I guess, if that's the right way to put it.
Absolutely.
That shows, man. Yeah, that's a great attitude, definitely.
Thank you.
Are there any new product categories or industries, maybe other than snowmobiling, that you're excited to get into or looking to get into?
Yeah, I mean, there's always other, what is the next thing, right? The sledding is snowmobiles in general. Like I said, that's my passion. So I get the most enjoyment out of all that work that goes into producing those parts. Not when it's not for the sledding industry, then that work feels a lot more painful.
Yep.
So, I think that sledding, snowmobiles, carbon fiber parts within that will always be the priority, as what Carbon Pursuit is. I think that, there's power, like there's dirt bikes and, side by sides and all those different things, that we could dabble in. And, I'm sure that there's a lot of great overlap there. A lot of, motorheads are doing, a variety of different power sports in the off season. But I don't know, it's one of those things where I want for the time being, the brand to be authentic to sleds. But that could change with time too, as we continue to grow, and maybe there's more people available to build other parts and stuff like that. But for now, we're still small. And so, focusing on sleds is kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
And I think for us too, there's still a lot of untouched, market there within sleds too.
In the sled market, yeah.
Yeah, like, we just this year started producing a couple Lynx specific parts. So we have like a Lynx headlight delete. Some of our drivetrain guards work on Lynx snowmobiles as well. So I think there's great parts for that. And then a big push for us in the off season, kind of this winter, we're starting in some of our testing phases and design phases already. But for next year, so going into, I guess it'd be winter, next winter, like the Skidoo trail sleds and the Polaris trail sleds, those especially Gen 5 trail sleds are very different than Gen 5 mountain sleds. So there's not a lot of carryover of our parts in that world. And there's a huge market there. And so for me, getting drivetrain guards, skid plates, different components for Midwest trail riders, Iron Dog guys, Alaska, that's a huge part of up there. Maine, there's
Yep.
such a big, trail community on the East Coast. And so for me personally, being a Midwest guy, it's like, that's a huge untapped market of trail riders. I think that, mountain market, we've got a pretty good foot there, and people know who Carbon Pursuit is. Trail riders, that's a whole untouched market for us. And so I'm looking forward to that. And then that also will get me into more racing, which is again, my heritage, my upbringing. So working with more of the Iron Dog guys, I love that race up in Alaska, want to work with as many of those as I can. Cross country guys here in Minnesota and that circuit. And then there's like the whole, like the Sioux, the ice racing and those crazy sleds that they build. I love all that stuff. I'm just a huge, like I said, I'm a sled guy. So working with as many of those different markets as I can, I think there's a lot we can still do within Carbon Pursuit there.
Yeah. So it's safe to say that the snowmobile community as it should, has a pretty large influence on your product development.
Yeah, it definitely does. And that's what, I love it. Like I said, I think that, if you ask my family whether it's, Rimshaw racing or, whether it's the Sioux 500 this weekend, I mean, I love it. Whether it's the trail ride on the lake where, I get to take my old vintage sleds out, or I get to take my brand new sled out to the mountains. It doesn't matter. I truly love it. And that's where I think we'll try to stay for the time being, is producing parts for that world.
Yeah. No, that's good, man. Do you have a favorite customer story or like a moment that kind of reaffirmed like why you do this?
There's probably a lot. Like I said, there's all the stepping stones and the highlights along the way. Those things that as a business owner and as I've started this, I try not to forget those, because with growth, some of those things you forget. But obviously, like there's your first customer sale, where it's like, oh my gosh, we actually sold the part, so that's like one of those things that I'll never forget. Or that first pro rider, like I said, Chase ran our Alpha rail brace right off the start, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's actually a guy that has a name, like he actually wants to run our product. And then as of recent, we've worked with, Brett Turcott. And so that's been a big one for me, is getting to work with Brett running our parts. Obviously I grew up, Brett being one of those guys that I was like, oh man, someday to work with Brett, that'd be a crazy cool thing. And it comes to fruition. Chris Brandt, another one. Chris is running a lot of our, Polaris belt guards. His guides do, so working with the likes of those people. Caleb Kosterky runs our belt guard on one of his lightweight 175 builds. So, those are moments for me that are surreal, because it's kind of like, getting to work with industry leaders, is something that's just, honestly, it's hard for me to wrap my head around. Like I said, I'm a small town Minnesota kid, just trying to build parts and sell parts and make a living. And so, these people that I've, kind of put on this pedestal or whatever you want to call it, watch the movies, all that stuff from little, to get to work with them and, be able to, talk with them and bounce ideas off them. That's pretty special for me. Like I said, it's keeping those near and dear to my heart. Recently the X Games just happened, a couple weeks back here. And so Deviant Inc. had a booth at X Games, and one of their sleds had our Polaris Matrix headlight delete in it. And so for me, like, to have something of mine at X Games, granted, it's not a sled competing, but it's in a booth at, and like I said, there's levels to it, right? There's plenty of companies that have their products on the sleds that are winning gold medals. But for me, just to have a part on a sled in a booth at X Games was a very, like, it's just one of those
That's
moments that,
cool.
yeah, I don't want to lose track of those things, again, like, it's kind of one of those surreal moments that you try to be like, take a step back and like,
Yep.
that's us, I built that with my hands, so it's special to me. Like I said, it's, the industry as a whole is near and dear to me. And so I try to just soak in all the little moments.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
No, it's a part on the sled and on a big stage, man. And
Yeah.
that's definitely something to be proud of. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yep. Yep.
So what, I mean, these guys are running your stuff and obviously you have a lot more, customers out there running your
Yeah.
parts. What feedback do you hear most often from them?
I would say general feedback is good. I mean, I think if the guys are running our stuff, then there's not a lot of complaints that I know of, to be honest. But I will say, one thing that we've struggled up to this point as a business is our lead time to get people parts. So when we were part time, that was always a problem because I could only do so much on nights and weekends. And then when I took this full time this fall, I was already behind. So by the time I said, hey, let's make the jump and let's take this full time, I haven't been able to catch up this winter, which is a great problem to have, and I'm very appreciative for that. But in turn, it makes customers very antsy and very impatient. I have so many great customers that understand and they give me time and they're willing to wait. But there's plenty of people that don't have the time to wait. I fully understand, as a guy from the Midwest, if your trip is planned out west and you want that part by that date, and if it doesn't get there, that's not a good thing. So I feel for those people, and I apologize to the ends of the earth that, if my stuff doesn't get there in time. But that's something we've really struggled with, is just having inventory so that we can be on top of shipping. And so my hope is that, this off season, given what we, sold this year and things like that, that we'll be able to take a lot of those metrics and, be a little bit more prepared for next winter, so that we can be more adaptable, get stuff out the door, quicker, and, try to create a little bit better, just customer satisfaction in the lead time department of what it takes to get people their stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this stuff takes time. I mean, especially when it's being hand built,
Yeah, and that's what's hard, is I can't punch out 100 of these things in a day. It's truly not possible. And everything gets built in a mold, and that mold has to cycle overnight to cook in an oven. So it's not like I can cycle that same mold multiple times in a day. So there's just so much goes into the logistics part of it, and the nuances of what carbon fiber is and what it takes to build it, that makes it a lengthy process, And so, like I said, my hope is that we can get a little bit better track record of having inventory and getting people stuff quicker.
Well, hopefully people will listen to this and they'll be like, wow, I thought he could punch out 100 in a day.
Yeah.
And that's
They
just not
stamp
going to
out,
happen.
Yeah.
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 They probably come off a conveyor belt,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yo,
No,
yo.
it's very true. I mean, there's obviously, different machine capabilities and stuff like that. Like if we had a CNC for trimming parts, that could make our trim process a lot easier. But I can tell you right now, that's not in the budget of the small family business. And so, every part I got to hand trim as well. So, I have to put on a full like hazmat suit, big respirators and everything like that, and trim the parts by hand. So it's a manual process right now that takes a lot of time to get stuff out the door.
Yeah, I hear you. Someday,
Yep,
someday,
yep.
hopefully it'll be streamlined. I mean, Henry Ford didn't start out with an assembly line for his first car. So
Yep.
it'll
We'll
get
get there,
there
baby steps. And, like I said, I think that along the way, keeping the brand authentic is important. So, I think that's, we don't want to go to the point where, that people don't have that, small family business feel to it anymore.
for sure.
If you could go back to day one of Carbon Pursuit, what would you tell yourself?
Uh, Nick, that's a good question. Gosh, I mean, there's the positives of like the ride is going to be so worth it, right? Like the people you're going to get to work with, the business you're going to get to build, the opportunities this is going to unlock, is going to be something that, your 12-year-old self could only dream of, right? And so there's all those positives. But then there's the realities too that I would want to tell myself of like, there's many nights and weekends that you will work nonstop, right? Like you're not going to get sleep for a long time. You're going to do your best to juggle raising a family, at the same time, as this, and making the right decisions. And there's going to be hard choices, and you're going to miss family events and all those things that, most business owners are aware of, once you get into it. But I think in the early days, you can be naive to that, and especially if you haven't seen that in your life, that can be a learning curve, right? Where, you have a lot of hard choices to make in what are you going to prioritize, and where are you going to, spend your money or spend your time. And if you're going to prioritize the business, there's some tough calls there. And you hope that you can make that all work. So yeah, I think if I
Yeah.
could go back to day one, just being realistic with myself and, would I change anything? No, I'm happy where we've gotten to. And I'm super appreciative. My wife has been along for the whole ride, and she works just as hard as I do to build it to what it is. And so yeah, I'm very, very blessed that, we've been able to get to this point, with the time that we've put into it.
Yeah.
Awesome. It
No,
looks like you've come a long way without giving yourself a pep talk, over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's
no,
awesome.
that
Thank
is
you.
awesome. I mean, what a great story. So, and really kind of a great way to kind of wrap this up. We're pushing an hour, so
Okay.
we can let you get back to your family. But yeah, no, man, that was what a great conversation. We really appreciate you jumping on, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, guys, too. Like I said, I'm here. If anybody ever needs to get a hold of Carbon Pursuit, just call us, email us, message us on whatever social media platform you're on. You're gonna get a hold of me or Leah. So it's the two of us. So happy to talk parts, happy to talk applications. Like I said, we're continuing to build and design new things. So if we don't have, something that fits what you're looking for right now, maybe it's coming. Like I said, diving more into the trail market side of things, continuing to expand on the mountain side, being a better part of, the sled community as a whole. I think in the future, being at more sled events, things like that, like the event that Jack just had up at the UP last weekend.
Yeah,
I wish we could have been there.
dude, it was
That
sweet.
I know. It's one of those things I felt had FOMO so bad, it's like I should be there. And so, obviously, we're on the grind right now. We're working nights and weekends, so we can't sneak away. But like I said, I think in the future that if we can be at events like that, to just support it, it's not like we're going to those events trying to make sales. We're just going to those events to be a part of the community, and introduce people to who we are and who Carbon Pursuit is and things like that. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's what I look forward to. I think there's a lot of awesome things within this, sled industry that are continuing to grow, and events like that seem to be coming up more and more. And so I look forward to trying to be a bigger part of those things.
yeah. Well, they're gonna I talked to Mark, one of the owners up there. Super cool people, by the way.
Yeah,
Jack and Sarah Lee and Mark are just really good people. And they're planning on having it every year,
awesome.
possibly like a multi-day thing. So yeah, you could definitely set it up for next year. I don't
Yeah,
know. They didn't have any dates. Obviously, we got a long ways until we need to worry
yep.
about that. But yeah, it was an awesome event, man. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's what our industry needs. It needs
It
the
is. It
communities
does.
as a huge part of it, and I think, whether it's here in the Midwest or out west or wherever, more and more events are coming up, and that's something that, like I said, the more we can be a part of, is just a better way for us to show, like we've talked about our authenticity, who we are as a brand, and just kind of continue to try to carve out our niche here.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, we'll wrap it up. That's probably a good ending point right there too. So if you guys want to find them, carbonpursuitllc.com.
Yep.
You're on socials, Carbon Pursuit. You're not hard to find.
No, yeah,
You get
give me a call.
Yeah, you can give them a follow, give them a like, and then obviously if you have any questions, you can get a hold of the man himself. So
Yep.
talk about pretty straightforward
Yep,
customer
yep,
service, right?
yep, exactly. So,
No press one for English and all that.
yeah, no, none of that. So, no, I really do appreciate it, guys, though. Nick, Derek, thank you for having me
Yeah.
on. Thank you for letting
Thank
me tell
you.
my story, and everything like that. And so, like I said, it means a lot to me. Like I said from the start, the fact that somebody wants to listen to me talk, means a lot. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure, buddy. We appreciate you. And I apologize for making you wait so long to get on here,
No,
but we did it. We made it happen. And
yep.
it's been an awesome conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. I
Thank
appreciate it.
thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.